Welcome, listener, to Right Here, Right Queer. This is Sarah Wallace,
And S.O. Callahan,
and today we are going to be talking about co-writing.
our favorite topic.
It truly is.
It really is, like no joke.
This is going to be hard to keep in a reasonable time frame,
It
but
is. We got so many fantastic questions that I had to narrow them down a little bit because we would talk for like 3 hours if we didn't. So
yeah.
it's a good problem to have. But I was like, oh man,
It is.
how do I combine all of these, condense them down? But I think I managed it. So we'll see.
Shannon has all the questions compiled from all you lovely listeners.
Okay, so the first one, how did you two decide to write a book together?
It's one of my favorite stories. It started with me seeing a post, a tweet that was basically a story prompt that said, I want a historical romance where two rivals write letters about each other to the local gossip column in order to ruin each other's reputation, and then the columnist decides to get revenge on them by announcing that they're engaged and they're unable to back out of it. And I shared that in my Instagram stories and said, this sounds like fun.
Yes, and so it was a Friday afternoon at like 2 o'clock, and I was sitting at work scrolling on Instagram, as one does, and I saw this story pop up. And I guess a little background first. Sarah and I had been following each other on Instagram for a couple of months at that point. I think because I'm pretty sure I read Letters to Half Moon Street in August of 22. Honestly, at this point, it's hard for me to remember exactly how much we interacted at that point. But I know that we were following each
Minimal.
other. Yeah, like barely at all is what I remember. And so we just like knew each other existed. I had read and reviewed your book. But anyway, I saw this story and I immediately responded and I just said, okay, so can we please write this together? And you responded back and said, oh my gosh, that would be amazing. And that was how we got started.
And I had read Fella Enchanted, and at the time, what I had written was queer Regency fantasy romance. And I knew that Shannon had written queer historical romance, and my stories are set at the beginning of the 19th century, and their stories took place toward the end of the 19th century in Ireland. And it was one of those light bulb moments where as soon as I got the message, it was like, this is the one author I know right now that I could possibly imagine. Like, we write the same sorts of stories. Yes.
Yeah,
It's just
yeah. And that was why I felt even a little bit confident to send you that message, because agreed, we both had similar writing interests, we both had similar writing styles before we ever wrote together, so if those things hadn't already been in place, I probably would not have sent the message. Just, because I was a fan of your books, but who am I to think that I can message Sarah Wallace and just be like, hey, let's write a book together? Was my thought process at the time. And so, but there were definitely factors that encouraged me to message you outside of just thinking that that would be something cool to do.
here we are.
And here we are.
Recording a podcast about it.
Right. And it worked out great. Oh my goodness. Okay, so the next question is, what are your individual strengths and weaknesses while writing, and how does that factor into co-writing?
So this is something we've actually discussed together a lot.
Yeah.
So the primary thing is that I write a lot of dialogue. All of my books are very dialogue heavy. It's part of how I read books. I have aphantasia, which means that I can't see things. Like, I don't have a mind's eye. So even before I knew that that was a thing, I would always gravitate towards dialogue in books because that was the part that my brain could wrap around easiest.
Right.
And I also have been a longtime fan of movies, especially old movies, which typically have a lot of really snappy banter. So I've always been drawn towards dialogue. So that's what I tend to write. The thing I'm not as good at is descriptions and like action sequences because I can't visualize it personally. So it was really hard for me to write it. My editor's often commenting like, I'm not sure what the blocking is here. And I'm like, honestly, same. So
You and me both.
it makes two of us. Great. But so
yeah, so that's basically where I come in, because I am the exact opposite of that. When I'm writing, I see the scenes play out in my head like a movie. I can see all the details. I see the whole picture, and that's how I approach my writing in every scene that I write, every chapter, all of it. But when it comes to dialogue, it's not for me. I mean, I feel like I can manage it well enough in moments where I feel like I'm very certain of what I need the characters to say. But when it comes to just writing, I know, I guess big chunks of dialogue are where I struggle, or like a very long kind of back and forth conversation. And so it just worked out so well that we kind of make up for each other's weaknesses with our own strengths.
We do, and I
And we kind of decided at one point that it's basically that when you're reading a chapter or several chapters, it's that Sarah can hear what the scene sounds like and I can see it. And I think that's really worked out well for us, being able to kind of balance each other out. And there are many times throughout, everything we've written so far where there will be big chunks of dialogue in one of my chapters, and you may be reading something that Sarah had input on or wrote the entire thing. And if there's a paragraph with lots of vivid description, there's a good chance that I probably helped or wrote that as well.
there's a good chance that I wrote a comment of, "What does this look like?"
Right, right.
What do they
Yeah.
look like?
Just leave the gap. I mean, and meanwhile, I've just got a gap in brackets like, Sarah, please write a speech here.
Heartfelt dialogue. Got it.
Yes, exactly.
Another thing that we have both differ in is I write what like Sebastian Othwell describes as patchwork writing, where I typically write scenes not necessarily in order. I'll kind of write the scenes that I'm most excited about, and then I kind of weave them together afterwards when I'm writing my solo pieces. That is much harder to do with a co-writer because you've got two brains working on the same story, so if I'm jumping ahead, I don't necessarily know where Shannon's character's development is. So I'm only thinking of it from my character's development sometimes. Like when we wrote Breeze Spells and Bridegrooms, especially, I wrote several scenes out of order that did wind up making it into the book. We just had to revise them pretty heavily because
Mm-hmm.
there was a scene where I had written it where Roger and Wynn were still kind of at each other's throats.
Yeah,
And then when we actually got to that scene in the actual draft, we're like, oh, this is very different, which is
right.
good. But I, at the time that I imagined that scene, I didn't know that that was where their relationship was going to be. So it developed organically, but sometimes where my inspiration comes is in like thinking ahead and imagining an exciting scene that might be, chapters away.
Right. I remember how vividly you wanted to write that scene. And so I
Yes.
was, you wrote it. We just had like a separate document open
Yep.
and
A
you
separate
wrote that whole scene or chapter out. And then
hmm
yeah, once we got to it, we had to edit it a lot. But the scene still remained largely intact, I would say.
Yeah, largely intact.
Just like you said, just kind of the emotions and where they were at with their relationship was much different, which is to be expected, I think, writing it out of order. Also, in that I'm opposite. I write in a very linear way. I start to finish, like, I'll get, inspiration for something, certainly, that is happening later on in the story. But my brain, I think, works differently in that I like to be looking forward to that as I'm writing. And it's not necessarily something that I'm like, oh, I need to get this down right now, which fair enough. I mean, there have been things that I've thought that and then didn't write it down and then absolutely forgot it. So sometimes I will like make a note for myself or I'll tell you and we can include it on the outline
Mhm.
or something like that, which has helped. But
Yeah.
I very much am like a start to finish all the way through type of writer, whereas you, like you said, you kind of do a little bit of patchwork. And I don't think that's gone away completely because there have been other times since writing Breeze Spells that you've kind of had that moment of just like, I need to write this right now.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
How do you decide who writes what? And how do we share the writing?
We kind of decided early on that we were gonna, for Breeze Spells and Bridegrooms at least, we were going to do two points of view. And I was gonna write one point of view and Shannon was gonna write the other. And when we were sort of in the preliminary planning phase of Breeze Spells and Bridegrooms, we had decided we wanted to combine our two storytelling preferences. So we wanted to have a Regency fantasy with Fae and humans. And since Shannon loves writing Fae realms, she took the Fae character, so I got the human character. which worked out really well because that's kind of how I've written in the past. That's how Shannon had written in the past. So it was really a nice blending. And with the Fae Human Relations series in general, I wound up getting all the Torquil's Tribunes because when we were talking about the story prompt and just brainstorming about the book, I had a very strong sense of how I thought the gossip column could go.
Because you've written epistolary
I've
before,
written epistolary, so I had a very good.
certainly more than I have.
Yeah, exactly. So like the voice felt very distinct to me from the beginning, and Torko's character evolved throughout Breeze Spells, like as we were writing it. But still, I think that their main personality was pretty clear from the beginning, I think.
Yeah,
Like I feel like from the very first Tribune draft, that's pretty much who Torquil was, kind of how they stayed, even though they developed and grew a little bit as a character. So yeah, that's how we planned out with Fae and Human Relations is we each picked a point of view character and then I got the additional point of view with Torquil.
and I think so far it's worked out pretty well for us.
It really has. It's been great. And like Shannon said earlier, we also do occasionally collaborate within our own chapters. I will leave an intentional blank for I don't know what this house looks like. Please describe it for me. This character's walking down a staircase, and in my head it's just a bunch of mist, and there's nothing around them. A house nebulously. And so Shannon will swoop in and describe something very perfect, and then sometimes I write the dialogue in Shannon's scenes. So we have a distinct separation, but we also, it's not like a this is my side of the table and that's your side of the table. We do share still.
Right. Yeah. And so, like in our outlines of our books, for example, it's broken down already from the start by point of view chapter. And so we kind of already have an idea of who's going to be writing what. And so, for example, nearly all, I can't say all anymore, but nearly all of any scenes that are a little bit spicy are written from my character's point of view. And so as we're outlining, what is coming up and all of the, chapters, what we're going to cover in each one as we're kind of planning out, we'll adjust things so that we make sure that when that time comes, it's on one of my chapters and not one of Sarah's chapters.
Yes. One of our beta readers called us out on that. I mean, it wasn't a bad thing. It was just like, don't think I didn't notice that Sarah's chapters always end right before,
Yep.
right before stuff happens. And we're like, yeah, well, you're not wrong.
Strategically done, my friend.
Yes,
Strategically
that was
done.
intentional. That was because up until we were writing book 3, I
Mhm.
didn't feel comfortable writing open door scenes.
Yep.
So Shannon very kindly took all of that for me. So I have expanded that
You
comfort
have.
zone a little bit.
You have.
In the Fan Human Relations series, you'll get a little bit of that from me.
Yeah. And I think that's, oh well, we'll just call it what it is. I think that's another benefit of co-writing is that I was able to kind of take that on until you felt comfortable with it. And that's not to say that you ever had to feel comfortable with it. But I remember that you kind of had that moment of you were just like, I think I'm ready.
Yes.
And I got to be like, yes, I got to pass the torch. And it was wonderful. So
Honestly, this is one of the beautiful things about co-writing is that you can watch each other write in real time and you get like a hype person watching you write your rough drafts, which is scary at first.
yeah, it took some getting used to for sure.
It did, but, like, when I wrote my first on-page sex scene, Shannon, like, sent me a text with, like, fire emojis, and I'm like, "Sarah, that was
Yeah,
so good!" So it was very affirming, so that I was able to, like, get through something that was kind of nerve-wracking for me and be like, "Oh, okay, I did a good job. Woo!
you did it. You did
I
it.
did it!" And I know we'll get into this probably more later, but like one of the nice things too with co-writing in terms of having a hype person is that you both have a vested interest in this project being good. So neither of us have ever said it was good when it wasn't because it needs to be good. Like both our names are going to be on this book. So we are always very honest with each other if a character moment doesn't feel true to the character, or if there needs to be more of a reaction, or if a scene needs to go a slightly different way than the way we've written it. We never had any like outright disagreements about how we've written anything, but it's nice that like when you have someone saying, "This is so well done, I love this," they are being honest, because if they're not being honest, like, that's their book too, so they need to be honest.
Exactly. Like, in this scenario, it's not just me being your friend and being like, "Oh my
Mhm.
gosh, Sarah, that's the best thing you've ever written," because
Right.
like my chapter's next, So it's like if
Yes.
I if I can't build off of what you've written, or if I can't like proudly 100% put my name to this because I have just as much invested into this as you do, then
Mhm.
I'm not gonna just, hype you up for no good reason.
Right, exactly.
But so but yeah, it's a very cool process to, and I think every book has gotten more and more that way of just like, time has passed and we've gotten, obviously more comfortable with being able to be open with each other about feedback and stuff like that. But I think from the beginning, it's never been oh, I didn't really like that, but I'm not going to say anything. Like we've had to be very honest from the very beginning about all of it to make it a project that we're both really proud of.
Agreed.
So the next question we had was about scheduling and the logistics of co-writing.
I love logistics. So
I thought you might like that one.
so Google Docs has been our friend, and we basically just have a shared folder on Google Docs where we both have access to edit and add and change whatever is inside that folder. And basically, I always create the document and then make sure that we both have edit access. And then we're going through, as we said, we often now, it didn't start this way. Now we write live a lot. So we'll, like, one person will write and the other person will watch, which is more fun than it sounds. I'm sure that sounds harrowing for some people to be like,
I
what?
know.
What is fun now?
I'm sure some people are like shaking at the thought of like
Right.
having someone watch them write.
Yeah, but it's honestly very fun. And we'll leave comments and like little emoji reactions to things. And scheduling, we talk every week. We have a weekly call where I usually have like a little agenda, informal agenda for us to talk through of any to-do list items that we have to get through. And if we're in between writing projects, there's a lot of stuff that authors have to do aside from drafting a novel. So we take care of those things when we're not in the drafting phase. When we are in the drafting phase, typically I write in like the afternoons, and Shannon typically writes in the evenings.
Yeah, I mean, just to the scheduling point, like you said, we now, I would say almost always, kind of, if we're able, we are both in the doc together if one or the other of us is writing. But when we first started writing, when we wrote Breeze Spells, I was working as a director of education at a school. I only had a certain amount of time in the day where I could dedicate to writing. And so we drafted that book in 6 weeks. And it was because every day, at least Monday through Friday, Sarah would be writing their chapter in the afternoon. 2, 3, 4 o'clock is when it would be up, but I would be at work. And so I obviously couldn't be sitting there as much as I wanted to. I couldn't be sitting there, following along at that time. But then I would, once I got the text message or whatever saying, okay, it's done, then if I was lucky to, I would have a few minutes to kind of read over the chapter that Sarah had put up last and at least get kind of like a rough idea of kind of what happened and, then start letting it percolate a little bit as I finished my workday. And then I would go home, cook dinner, do all the things I needed to do. And then basically from like 7 to like 11 o'clock at night, I would write my kind of response chapter. And that went on for a solid month and a half. And we knocked that book out.
It was very intense.
It was. We were able to do a little bit more on the weekends, I think, as far as I can remember. It's been
Yeah.
so long ago now. I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure that that's how that went. But yeah, so, we weren't able to kind of follow along live, or at least I wasn't able to. I think you were there most of the time for when I was writing in the afternoons.
Yeah.
But now I work from home. So that has changed a lot as far as our kind of scheduling goes with writing. And also, I think we got really lucky. We are in the same time zone.
Yes.
Because like we said before, we didn't know each other at all before this process started. We didn't start off as like close friends who decided to write a book. And so the fact that we live literally 7 hours away from each other when we could have lived anywhere in the whole entire world, I think we got really lucky with that.
We did.
And certainly it helps too with being able to kind of be on the same page, following along when we're writing, and also just kind of, it's not one of us isn't writing at 2 o'clock in the morning, for the other person. And it's really, we got lucky with that too.
Yeah, we did. And another facet of the logistics is in terms of brainstorming. When we first started, we were both, I believe, kind of pantsers.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little bit of planning. I would say maybe plantsers,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to call that. But with our more recent projects, we have definitely morphed into more planners than
Yeah.
pantsers. And there's still an element of improvising as you go, what feels right in the scene, what feels right for the characters in the moment. But it is pretty fascinating how our planning process has evolved over just a year, year and a half,
Yeah.
where it used to be yeah, and then, this will happen. Sure, that works. And it would be a very vague thing. And then between the beginning of Breeze Spells towards the end of Breeze Spells, we had started a process of writing out what chapter was next and roughly what was going to happen in that chapter. And then it was by the end of Fire Spells. I think by the end of Fire Spells, we had really started to nail that down, or that was a process we were doing regularly.
Yeah, it happened pretty quickly, I think,
Mm-hmm.
because we found that it worked. And we've continued to expand on that. And now I would consider it a well-oiled machine.
It really is. Yeah.
We can knock out an outline in an hour.
It's amazing. We have spreadsheets now.
Yes, full spreadsheets. And I am impressed by it and I'm a part of it. So I think we've done a really good job kind of figuring out what works best for us and adding kind of helpful things that we didn't start with, that we've found. I feel like every new project we kind of are like, this worked really well last time, so let's include that. And also I feel like each time we've kind of been like, let's also do this because I think that will help. So one, for example, will be keeping track of the days of the week.
Yes.
Because there's two of us writing. And so it's always even writing as a solo author, it's still kind of just okay, what day am I on again?
Yeah.
But when there's, two people kind of working on the same thing, it's extremely helpful, we've found, to have details like that of just what does the timeline look like? What day are we on? Those little things. And so, to the corner of our outline, we have days of the week. We have little things like that just, it seems kind of silly. Okay, we have an actual calendar kind of written out for what's happening in the story, but it's incredibly helpful. So
helpful.
We touched on this one a little bit, but it was the process of writing 2 points of view. And then specifically, has it ever gone differently than we planned? And if so, how did we keep track to avoid continuity issues?
We already talked about the process of writing 2 POVs, but I don't think we talked about this part of it yet, is that co-writing, even when you are planning it meticulously, it's very similar to improv acting with a partner, where some of the rules of improv is that you cannot negate what your partner says. And part of the challenge and fun of improv is you never know exactly what your partner's going to say. So even when we plan out our scenes and what's going to happen in the chapter, I still don't know what the chapter is going to end on when I'm watching Shannon write. And one thing that we discovered along the way is that we both tend to plant seeds. And sometimes it's an intentional planting of seeds. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just a detail that the other person picks up on that the author of that scene didn't necessarily intend for it to be a big detail. They just kind of toss it in. And it's this pretty beautiful thing that without communicating it, we will pick at those seeds and continue to kind of grow, if I'm going to continue that metaphor, grow that plant and water it and sprinkle it in with our own chapters. And so sometimes a very small character detail can become a huge character detail, or a plot point that was a little tiny plot point that became an integral plot. I don't say plot point because that makes it sound like we hinge the entire story on that, but it can be a plot detail that we don't plan to have as that the case, and then it morphs into that. And it's cool because it's never a thing that we say, hey, I wrote this in there because I want to make sure that we do that. We don't talk about it.
No.
It just happens.
Right. And which I think it's so beautiful, Sarah.
It
I think the way that happens organically, like you said, we never have discussed those little things, those little like kernels that end up in there. But some of them have been my absolute favorite. Like, that will happen as you're writing and you've picked up on something that I wrote chapters and chapters ago, or it was like briefly mentioned, and then you bring it full circle. And I'll just have that moment of just like, no, that's so perfect. Like, it couldn't have gone better, And I think that's just, I mean, it's really happened from the beginning, but I think the more that we get to know each other as people and as authors, it happens more and more just because I think we are so in sync and in tune with what the other kind of like loves about those moments and that kind of thing that it just really, it's so special.
It is. And I think it's an aspect of co-writing that is very integral, the trusting of each other, which is something that you can't control necessarily. But you have to trust your partner. You have to be able to trust your partner because, as any author knows, writing a character is very intimate and it's hard to, give that care of that character over to another writer. I think one of my favorite things about writing with Shannon is that I know that she is going to take care of my characters with the same tenderness and affection that I give my characters, and then I'm going to do the same. So, like, each other's characters are our own characters in a way, even though Win will always be Shannon's character and Roger will always be my character. They're also both our characters. I don't know. It's really cool that that's a thing that has happened that is something I didn't really think about or expect when we both started this journey. I don't think either of us expected that to happen.
No,
And it's pretty magical to be able to both take care of the same characters. I don't know.
it is. It's a very, honestly, it's like co-authoring, but also a little bit co-parenting.
Well, parenting, I
Just
know.
because, and as many of our listeners probably know, if they have children, co-parenting is not easy. Be it, if you're, involved with your co-parent, romantically or not, whatever situation it may be, like, taking care of a child takes two people fully committed to that, and I think it's very similar with our characters. Like, that is, basically our child that we have created and nurtured. And like you said, we have to trust each other to kind of do, the same. And it's, yeah, like that's a huge element, I think. To kind of go back to the question, yes, absolutely, it's gone differently than we planned. Either, just from us kind of having a discussion together and deciding like, ooh, this is feeling a little bit different than we originally planned out. How do you feel about going this way? And then we'll decide together if that feels right and kind of in our outline change it. Or it could be a spur of the moment, like going back to the improv comparison of just like, that was absolutely not how I thought that chapter was going to go as I was watching Sarah write it, but 10 out of 10 times it's even better than I expected. And I think that's the beauty of having that trust and, like you said, like understanding that you're not going to see whatever comes and immediately have the thought of just like, ooh, well, that's not what I would have done, or ooh, I wish we would change that. Or personally, I've just never had that moment, so it may be something that people encounter, but also I think just keeping that open mind and knowing that it is two people writing a book together. Like, I am not Sarah and Sarah is not me. Like, we have separate minds and we have separate thoughts and we have separate feelings on things. And so, yeah, things have absolutely been different than what, I'll be reading a sentence as Sarah's typing it, and the sentence goes in a completely different direction than what I even predicted how it would end. And I'm just like, yes, that is so even better than I thought it was going to go. Like, so that's kind of the beauty of it, is just like having that trust in each other and that confidence that like we have the same goal in mind and just kind of let it unfold organically. And so far it's worked out quite well.
It's been pretty great.
So the second part of it, how did we keep track to avoid continuity issues? I think because we are kind of watching it unfold almost in real time, that helps a little bit as far as just like, I mean, I was there when it was written, from my perspective. And so, but of course, always having the option to go back and kind of like reread what came before. I mean, certainly there are times when I will go back a chapter at least. Every time before I write my next chapter, I'll at least kind of go back over what Sarah wrote But there's been times where I've gone back like several chapters or back to, oh, they were talking about this event is coming up 4 chapters ago. So I need to go back and kind of go over it again and make sure I don't miss any details. So that definitely helps with continuity. And then also the 100 rounds of revisions that we do in between drafting the book and it being published. I mean, we're 5 rounds in and I'll be like, oh my gosh, Sarah, we completely missed this.
Yes.
And so we'll have to either go back and change it or add something, but that's all part of the fun.
It is. And like another added benefit of co-authoring is that you have 2 eyes on the project at all times, basically. So there have been times where there has been like a continuity error between one point of view to the next. And usually, similarly to what we were saying before about if a character says something out of character or whatever, which is rare, to be fair. But similarly, if there's a continuity error of like, oh, I had written that they talked in the previous chapter and highlighting a part where I had written that they don't talk. So like, okay, I can include the conversation then. Great.
Yep.
So we sometimes have that happen. But again, that's pretty infrequent and it's not to the point where it's an issue. It's just like, it's honestly a nice thing because that sort of thing is kind of nice to have another person looking over your work to make sure you're not forgetting stuff or you don't have plot holes or you don't have continuity errors. It's kind of nice because we are both looking at it. We're both remembering different pieces of it. So it's helpful.
Certainly there have been times where, I remembered something that you didn't, and same, you remembered something that I didn't, and then we can either in the moment or like as we're reading back over it or anytime throughout the process, it's just a quick like, oh, I just noticed this, and it'll be, we either make a note for later or we can go in and change it. But again, it's the teamwork aspect of it, of just being open about it. For me, I'm grateful. It's like, thank goodness someone else is kind of like going right behind me and can make sure like, oh, you forgot that, because there's nothing worse than like being months down the line and then you're like, wow, how did not only we both missed that. How did we do that? And so,
Exactly.
but it happens. It happens.
It happens.
Okay, we already touched on this one a little bit too, but if you disagreed on what direction the story should go, how did or would you resolve it?
We've never actually disagreed in a strong sense.
No.
There's a book coming up that at one point I had in my head that there would be like a third act breakup moment, which to be fair, I don't like writing. Neither of us like writing those. We don't have them very often.
Yeah, right.
But we had flirted with the idea of having a third act breakup and had been mentioned when we talked about planning of the scene. We had sort of written that. So we were getting closer to that scene. And I had said like, okay, then they have the fight. And Shannon was like, but what if they don't? I was like, oh. And they were like, what if they don't fight? What if instead it's fine and they don't ever get into an argument and it's just stops? And I'm like, oh, I like that much better. That's kind of, I think, the most intense our disagreement has ever been is what if this? And the other person's like, oh, okay, great.
Yeah. And really, I truly wish/hope it never happens, that someone listens in on one of our kind of planning moments especially when we're like gearing up for a project, because I think that's when we're most rabid about it.
Yeah.
It's just that we're just like foaming at the mouth with excitement. And so basically every idea that gets tossed around is the best idea we've ever had in our lives.
Brainstorming has never been more fun than it with a partner.
It's so great.
This is what they wish school projects were.
Yes.
Group projects are supposed to be.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more. It's just like, I wish everyone could experience this for once in their life. To just have that like raw excitement towards a singular project and both just being like over the top excited about it, and just like everything we throw at it feels good because like we both support each other's creativity and our ideas. And I think keeping that open mind makes it so much easier kind of like molding what we both want. I mean, every story is very much both of our creation. I mean, it could be, like, even though our books are written from 2 points of view, ultimately there does end up being like a singular main character who I think is the driving force of the story. And we've both had that opportunity multiple times, because I think that's just the way that it works out. But also, again, I'm not sure that we've ever actually like necessarily discussed it to be that way. But I think in retrospect more is just, we'll look back and be kind of like, this worked out so well. well. Like, one of us just kind of gets not necessarily more of a chance to shine, but just kind of like takes the lead on
Yeah.
more and gets to have like bolder ideas, I guess, highlighted within the story. And I think we've both allowed the other to have those moments. And so it feels very much like we are a team in this. And
Yeah.
what, other than when it comes to like, the logistics side of things, which is much more Sarah's field than mine. And I am happy to sit back on most of those things. I'm just like, I'm just here. You just tell me what I need to do. It's fine. But when it comes to the actual like creativity and writing process of it, we are a team.
Absolutely.
Well, with that being said, the next question is how has our friendship developed since becoming co-authors?
Beautifully. I mean, I don't know how it would be for other authors who are co-writers and aren't best friends, but like we discussed before, it is kind of intimate writing a character or a world together. Like there's a lot of honesty. There's a lot of vulnerability too, because you have to be willing to like throw out ideas. What if it's not a good idea? I don't know, but I'm gonna offer it up in case it is. That's a vulnerable act, and you do it consistently, like all the time.
Yeah,
You're throwing out.
over and over and over and over again. Yeah.
And then, like, you don't have to be watching each other write, but that also is a vulnerable thing to watch each other write. And having someone write your raw writing that's unfiltered, unpolished, unedited, that is also very vulnerable. And I think that because we've been vulnerable and honest and we've trusted each other, I think that has lent itself naturally into us becoming really good friends.
Yeah.
Because I think those are all things that are necessary for friendship too, is you need to be able to trust your friend and you need to be able to be vulnerable with your friend. And there's an emotional intimacy in strong friendships. Things like, without getting into any details, like we've talked about passion projects. We started a project that's a passion project I have had in mind for at least a decade, that I wanted to write this project. And because of Shannon, we wrote it. And kind of similar to what we're talking about with our characters, that is also a pretty magical thing to be able to say, this is something I've always wanted to do. And the other person is like, great, let's do it. Let's go. Shannon got just as excited about this project as I did, even though the topic and the setting were not things that were as close to their heart as they were to mine. Shannon still had to be excited about the project in order to write it. So we both got very excited. We both leaned into it in our own way. We both did research in our own way. And so similarly, Shannon has had ideas that I've been like, yes, great, say less, let's do it. And I think that's also been a really cool aspect of our friendship that is kind of rare, that you don't have a lot of friends that you can be like, this is an idea I've had in my head for a while. And then the friend is like, great, let's make that a reality. Let's play in that like mental sandbox together.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
I'll bring the shovel, you bring the pail.
Yeah.
And that truly is it. Just like everything you said, the vulnerability and the trust and I think probably just the type of stories that we like to write are incredibly soft and emotional and character driven. And I think, before we ever wrote together, I mean, separately, those were already like stories that we love to tell. So obviously we're very emotional and caring and soft people already to be able to craft those kinds of stories. So I think you push two very empathetic and encouraging and supportive people together, and that's what you get, and I mean, it's fantastic. But really, I mean, we had no idea how it was going to work out. Going back to the beginning, like I hoped that Sarah would want to be my friend. I mean, that's always the goal, right? When you start like forming a friendship with someone. But we truly we jumped in with both feet, because we were not close previously, but we kind of started this project. And I think just the nature of the project in writing Breeze Spells, I mean, it's a love story. It is soft and romantic, and these characters are falling in love. And so basically every day for 6 weeks writing Breeze Spells, we were writing a love story back and forth to each other every single day. And so it's just like, how can you not develop that closeness with someone when that is your interaction with them every single day for over and over and over again? And that's something that we both feel strongly about too, is just that love doesn't just have to be romantic love. Yes, that's what we're writing in our story, but I love Sarah as my friend, and I'm so grateful for that. And again, we got so lucky with it. We got so lucky because it just, well, and then, we finished writing Breeze Spells and we weren't really sure what we were going to do after that. I think we had talked about it a little bit as far as just like, are we going to keep going with this? Because I was very much well, let's just, see how this one book goes. But Sarah's very much a multi-book series writer. And so I think before we even finished Breeze Spells, you kind of had it in your head that like, oh no, we're not done yet.
I did.
We're not stopping here. But we also, because it was such an intense month and a half that we were both very tired by the end of it. And so we both agreed that we needed like a little bit of a break, but we had only really like been getting to know each other for a month and a half at that point outside of just writing our project. So it was just like, okay, well, let's just, pause for now and we'll figure it out. And there was like a 2-week period where we didn't really talk.
Yeah.
Much from what I can remember. Like we definitely kind of went cold turkey as far as like talking basically all day, every day to nothing. And we both have agreed since then that we like went through withdrawals basically from each other and from just writing together, and like in all aspects it was withdrawals. And so it didn't last very long, and I think that's probably the longest we've gone without talking to each other since.
It lasted 2 weeks.
Yeah. So, which again, also I'm very grateful that we both were kind of just like, yeah, let's not do that again, okay?
Yeah.
But yeah, all the stars aligned to kind of bring us together. We both published our first books in February of 2022. We didn't know each other at all, had never spoken, had no connection whatsoever. We read each other's books later in that year, and then here we are. Like it's just, some days I still can't wrap my head around the fact that like so much has changed in such a relatively short amount of time, but I'm just so grateful for it.
Me too.
So yeah, there's your answer. We are incredibly close now, basically attached at the hip, and I can't imagine and refuse to imagine my life without Sarah in it anymore.
Honestly, same.
So that being said, now that we have fully shared that we are inseparable and also incredibly lucky, what are some things to consider when choosing a co-author, including the pros and cons and the easiest and trickiest parts?
So this is a good question. Breeze Spells and Bridegrooms was, I think, the 4th co-writing project I've ever attempted. It was the first to succeed. So I've attempted it several times. It usually putters out around 3 or 4 chapters in. So knowing what has worked with Shannon versus what hasn't worked with previous other writers with me, and I should add that usually ended on my chapters. It's usually my fault. But I think it's important to make sure you're both writing the same sort of story. As in, like as Shannon said before, we both are character-driven writers. Both of our books, solo and combined, there is plot, but most of the plot is characters falling in love. It's not like high stakes, it's not epic tales. Well, Shannon has pretty epic tales, but
Still soft though, and still a romance.
so I think if you're a writer and you're looking to be a co-writer with somebody else, I would recommend finding, if you're a character-driven writer, find another character-driven writer. If you are a plot-driven writer, find another plot-driven writer, because one of the things that has helped for me and Shannon is that we both come at stories from the same angle,
Right.
being character-driven writers. For example, with sex scenes, we both come at the sex scene with the idea of like, why is this scene happening for these characters? How are these characters responding in this scene? Why is this scene important for these characters in this moment? Why is the scene happening now for these characters as opposed to earlier or later? And I think if you are a character-driven writer who's trying to write with a plot-driven writer, you're not going to have the same style because you're both approaching it from a different angle. And I think possibly incompatible angles. So I think that would probably be the first thing that I would say. The second thing I would say is to also try to make sure that you have someone that you can agree on the end goal of the story. So even though Shannon and I write and we improvise within our chapters and we surprise each other, we always know how the book is going to end. We can always agree on the conclusion of the story. We usually have the final scene kind of not sketched out, but we usually discuss the end of the book well before we get there.
I would say once we reach like the middle arc, we've pretty much decided like where the ride is going to end.
Exactly. And I think that's important because you both need to have the same end goal in mind so that way your character development can be going in the same direction. So that even, again, even when we surprise each other, we are always both going in the same direction. And I think that's very important. And I think, as you said before, trusting each other is very important. So you've got to be writing with someone that you trust. Not just with trusting each other with your stories, but also with other logistics. Because one thing we forgot to, or I forgot to talk about, is the logistics of the publishing side of things. And the way we handle is I do all the formatting. I share my screen and Shannon watches the formatting and we both discuss what we want to do for font and stylistic choices. We decide that together as a team, but I am doing all of the hands-on work, which I like to do. But if you are with someone that you don't trust to give that control over to, then it's not going to work. So you have to make sure you're with somebody that you trust to handle the formatting. Like I'm never going to go in after our calls and change the font to something that I like better. I'm going to tell Shannon in the call, well, I like this font better, and we'll discuss it. We've never had a disagreement about fonts, but
No. This sounds very personal, Sarah. Do you have something to tell me?
I no. But anyway, so like you have to make sure that you're with somebody who you can trust for that sort of thing. And with the publishing part of it, I upload all of the documents and everything, all the files to Draft to Digital. And again, usually I'm sharing my screen and Shannon's watching. But even like when I did the large print for Breeze Spells and Bridegrooms, like Shannon wasn't watching with that. She trusted me to do it and do it in a way that still honored our vision and didn't do anything too wild, which I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But like you have to be able to trust the person because you are putting your work in their hands. And I think you kind of have to decide. And this was something we discussed very early on. It wasn't before we started writing, but it was when we were still in the very early stages of writing Breeze Spells and Bridegrooms. We started discussing logistics of are we going to go wide or are we going to do KU? If we go wide, what are we going to do? How are we going to split the royalties? Because that's the thing is like you have to be able to be honest with each other about money too. And so you have to have somebody that you are willing to split costs with and that you know isn't going to cheat you in any way with money. So, like, and copyright lasts for a very long time. Co-writing partnerships last longer than many marriages. So you have to be working with somebody that you can fully trust. Now, with the money piece, I should add that I don't have Shannon's bank information. I just add her as a collaborator on the project, and then Draft to Digital shoots her a little message, and then they set it up on their end. I don't have anything to do with that. So if you're hearing this and you're like, "Oh my God, I have to give my bank," you don't.
No.
I thankfully do not know Shannon's bank information, so you don't have to worry about that. But I do have royalties because I sell my books on my personal website. So any royalties I get from that is technically our royalties, but we talk about it and figure out how much money is going to be allocated towards projects that I made versus what we made. So yes, I think things to consider with a co-author is make sure that you are writing from the same perspective and that you can agree on the story you're going to tell at its core, and make sure that somebody you can trust, and make sure you can agree on the logistics. You don't have to be as like one person does all of the stuff, like all the publishing side of it. We did it because I happen to love doing that. So
Yeah, it was very much a joint decision that you would be doing all of that because you enjoy it and I have no preference. So it's just like, it's one of those things where, I mean, again, it's just kind of that trust element and also just a partnership, really. I mean, it's just, that's something that you like to do and I don't care. So absolutely you can do that.
exactly. And if you both enjoy, if you're talking with another person about co-writing and you both enjoy that, then maybe split the difference. And like one person does the formatting and the other person does the uploading. Or you flip between who does the formatting and who does the uploading, or whatever between books. Because I don't have to do it for every book. I do because I like to do it. But we could split it if we had wanted to, sort of thing. So
The biggest one for me, I think, is just communication.
oh God, yes.
We without good communication, this would not be possible.
Yeah.
You could have all of those other elements that we just talked about, but if your communication isn't aligned, then it's not going to work. That's the biggest component, I think, of
Yeah.
co-authoring is just you have to be able to communicate well, often, openly, honestly. Like it just, like you said, I mean, this co-authoring is forever, friends. Don't forget that. Like, I mean, Sarah and I will forever be linked now, no matter what happens, because, it just, I mean, that's a decision that we made going into this, is just, we didn't know exactly how big of a decision it would be, like outside of writing our one book that we kind of started with. But I
Mhm.
think because we both so quickly found out that, like, hey, this actually works really well for both of us, and we're both honestly highly compatible in a lot of those very important ways, then we decided to, continue it. And, I mean, it very well could have been that we just wrote the one project and kind of wrapped that up nicely and moved on. But I think because it worked so well and we found so much joy in doing, writing together. But I mean, it's more than just the writing,
Mhm.
there are hours and hours and hours of behind the scenes work that goes into publishing a book. And it's been fantastic to be able to share it with someone who is equally as excited about every project, and, splitting the workload. I mean, we both kind of discuss, all of our Instagram followers can see that, we both kind of take different things, and,
Mhm.
we make our own content to share, but we always collaborate on it. And so we're kind of like splitting the workload there. And so everything from the publishing, writing, marketing, it's all a joint effort. And without good communication, that would be a horrible experience, I can imagine.
Yes.
It would truly be a nightmare, I think. And so, again, we just, in some ways, we did get lucky with that. But also, I think it's just because we're both incredibly committed to making this successful. There's been days for both of us where it's just like, I don't think I can write a chapter today. We don't just go radio silent on each other. We will communicate that. We will say, hey, I think I need a day. Or it could be anything, but just that open line of communication and honesty within that communication has been the number one most important part of this.
Another one I'll add to is, and this is like, I wouldn't say it's a lesser one. I think it's been less of an issue for us, but it has come up a little bit, is a willingness to compromise on things.
Yeah.
Again, I don't think either of us compromise a whole lot because we usually are in agreement, but like it's little
Mhm.
things that you wouldn't think about that do
Yeah.
wind up coming into the story. Like, how do you format your M dashes? How do you put the possessive apostrophe on a name that ends with S? Like, these are discussions we have had, and we have each compromised. I think I compromised on Shannon's S apostrophe preference, and Shannon compromised on my M dash preference. And it's a weird thing that you have to actually be able to, like, you have to discuss that up front. We found this out when we were in the polishing up phases of Breeze Spells, where we're like, oh shit.
What do we do here? Yeah.
And we can't have a book that has two different formatting styles, actually.
Right.
So we had to make a decision and stick with it. Capital C Council will forever haunt us. But
Oh gosh, yeah.
sorry. But those are still little things that you have to kind of discuss and be open to give and take in each. And it wouldn't be fair if one person did all the compromising. Like, it wouldn't be fair if Shannon was like, okay, fine, we'll do all of your formatting and I'll change everything I've ever done for years. And it wouldn't be fair the other way around. So we kind of, not intentionally like, okay, you got the last one, but as in, okay, this one's not a hill I'm gonna die on, and it's fine, I don't care.
Yeah.
And that's something that we've discussed. It's a small thing, but I would just add, be open to compromise on details that you might not otherwise think about.
I agree. And if you're a person who struggles with compromise, might not be a good idea for you, honestly,
Yeah,
because
might be a challenge.
even unless you find someone who's willing to compromise on every single thing. But also, I just can't imagine that would be very fun for either person,
Yeah.
because it just, there has to be balance. There has to be, I mean, that's what's part of what's made this so fun, is just kind of combining our talents and,
Hmm.
the knowledge that we've brought to all of our projects separately. And it's a group effort. And so you have to be willing to make it a group effort, not just like you said before, Sarah, about group projects in school. Like, everyone has nightmares from that because, everyone, at least in my memory, a lot of it is just like everyone was doing their part separately. And then you just try to like mash it all together at the end and hope you get an A, right? But
Right.
this is so much more than that. This is like every detail you have to be in agreement on, or else someone's not going to be happy with it. So,
And to like piggyback off of that a little bit too, similar to continue the group project comparison, is you also
mhm.
both have to be all in on it.
Yeah.
Because if one person is not, then it's not going to go anywhere. Because that's probably where my previous ones have failed, is because I wasn't necessarily all in on the project. And so my motivation slowed. And because my motivation slowed, the momentum of the project slowed. And then it was impossible to pick back up again.
Hmm.
And I think the reason this has worked so well is because we both get fucking feral about these stories that we cannot wait to write them. And every day we can't wait to write them. So
Yeah,
I think you need to make sure that you are completely in love with the story that you're going to write, that you're both completely in love with it, because otherwise it won't work.
I agree. All right, so we are down to our very last question, and it is, what are we looking forward to?
Fire Spells Between Friends is coming out later this year. Very excited about that. Fae Human Relations is a 4-book series, and actually all 4 books are written. The last 2 are in various revision phases, so it's going to be a little while before they're out, but we plan to release them next year. And then we have another project that is drafted, going to come out later. That's also in a revision phase. And then we have ideas. We have multiple ideas that we've kind of broken up the year, where the first half of the year we draft books, and the second half of the year we revise what we've written, or revise in general, because we're working on revisions from stuff we wrote last year. So it's kind of a funky cadence where, you send something out to beta readers while you work on something else. And then when you get the beta reader feedback, you send what you were working on to alpha readers. So we kind of have a lot of things in motion right now, but we have multiple projects that we are excited to write, and we have an idea of what we're going to work on next year for drafting. We have at least 2 projects we're definitely going to write next year, and another project we might write next year. Probably will, but we're not holding ourselves to that in case we get tired. But
Oh,
we have a lot of ideas, so
we do. Yeah,
yeah, lots to look forward to. It's going to be great.
lots to look forward to. And just, it's hard to pick one thing that I'm like most looking forward to. I think just we just hype each other up so much with it. And it's just every single thing that's coming down the pipeline is exciting because we're enjoying it together. And I think that makes such a difference.
It
So,
does. It really does.
yeah, there's co-authoring in a nutshell.
There it is. Hope we answered what you wanted to hear. Those were great questions.
They were such great questions. I was so grateful that everyone was very interested in kind of learning more. And I feel like we've both had opportunities to say most of these things in like various locations, but to finally get the chance to like talk about it together, just one on one, has been really great because it has truly been one of the most incredible things I've ever been a part of. And I'm just so grateful for it. And I'm so grateful for Sarah and our partnership. And yeah, what I'm looking forward to is the next however many years that we can keep writing our stories, because I know that we have lots more to come.
I'm really grateful for you two and this partnership. Writing together has really changed my life in so many good ways. So I'm very excited about what's to come. So where can our listeners find you?
You can find me on Instagram at S.O Callahan. That's where I keep all my updates at.
And you can find me on Instagram at sarah.wallace.writer. And theoretically, you can also find me at sarahwallacewriter.com, but my website has been sort of down lately. So hopefully by the time this podcast comes up, it'll be back up, but we'll see.
Hopefully, fingers crossed.
But in the meantime, thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.